Thank you. So Amelia Johns is an associate professor in digital and social media in the School of Communication at UTS. I think that's right. Yep.
Yes.
Her work spans the field of social media and youth civic participation, with a focus on young people's negotiation of racism and hate speech, digital citizenship and activism, digital literacy and safety. Her recent work is focused on misinformation, platform governance, and trust on Facebook and WhatsApp. She's the recipient of an ARC Discovery project, which is on fostering global digital citizenship, diasporic youth in a connected world. And she was awarded a Facebook Content Policy Award in 2019 for the project Mapping and Countering the Diffusion of Hate Speech Across Social Media. She's also led a UNESCO-funded project in 2021, Mapping and Review of Online Resources for Vulnerable and Marginalised Young People in the Asia Pacific, and is co-author of the recent book, WhatsApp, From a One-to-One Communication App to a Global Communication Platform, and is also co-editor of Negotiating Digital Citizenship, Control, Contest and Culture. Thank you for coming to speak to us today.
Great. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thanks for inviting me. I would like to begin by acknowledging on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and to pay my respects to elders past and present, to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Okay, so I'm really interested to present some research findings to you today. I am wanting to preface that by saying that I'm no expert on algorithms and algorithmic culture, but that the invitation was one that really intrigued me and I found to be a really great opportunity that I couldn't pass up. And that's because of some really interesting findings that myself and colleagues discovered in a 3-year research project where young people demonstrated awareness of how recommendation algorithms work to shape the content that was selected for them on platforms like TikTok and also Instagram, and how by liking and following certain content and content creators, they could work with the algorithm so that their feed felt like it was their community. I'm just going to click to the next slide if I can. Yes. So the findings I'm presenting today come from an ARC discovery project that is being tied up this year, where we looked at what we defined as diaspora youth, and that is largely because we were interested in looking at young people's transnational connections. So we were interviewing and doing ethnography with young people who had at least one parent who was born overseas. And we were really interested in looking at the digital citizenship practices and digital literacy practices of those young people, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. We used a mixed methods approach in the project. So what I'm going to focus on today is not the online surveys or the semi-structured interviews with stakeholders. We spoke to teachers in schools about digital citizenship and digital literacy programs, policymakers from the E-Safety Commissioner's Office. We also spoke to workers from multicultural youth services like Centre for Multicultural Youth and Mayan, and ended up doing some interviews with those stakeholders too, because we found that they gave a view into the young people that we were wanting to speak to and learn from that was sometimes missing from educators and from policymakers. But today I'm wanting to focus on semi-structured interviews and what we describe as rapid ethnography, and I can speak to that a little bit in question time. With diaspora youth, we did 26 interviews, and from the interview sample, we then narrowed that down to 11 young people that we did the digital ethnography with. Don't have a lot of time to talk about the ethnographic method, but we can talk about that a little bit later on, as I mentioned. So just a bit of a snapshot of the young people who participated in the ethnography and interviews. In terms of age, we spoke to 13, it was originally 13 to 18-year-olds, but we extended that to 21, particularly because we were speaking to refugee youth as well, who had more extended educational trajectories. And there's a bit of a snapshot there of where the young people in our study, where their parents were born. Okay, so this is really, I think, one of the most striking quotes, I guess, that came through our study, which indicated to us how young people were negotiating algorithms to experience and connect with identity and community. And I don't think anything spells this out better than this quote from Devi, who we have called Devi, who says, so like basically that could be called my For You page. And this is on TikTok. When I compare my For You page to my friends' pages, they get like all these Indian content creators and like dancers. I don't get that much dance. I get a lot of K-pop. I guess I do get a lot of brown community on it as well. That's what we call ourselves, I guess. It's just like there's a lot of social issues on there as well. A lot of people make videos just talking and stuff. And yeah, later in the interview, she says, TikTok helps me to stay connected with my community and stay up to date. So to connect this quote to a concept of multicultural algorithms, the theme for today, Devi feels that the For You page on TikTok, which is the main page where content is recommended and tailored to users based on their likes and other engagement metrics, as Crystal discussed earlier, she felt like that was reflective of her community. She described how what she calls brown community bridges what she sees on her feed with what some of her friends see. And she actually compared, like amongst their friendship group, they compared their For You pages to see what was different and what was similar. And she does note that there are some differences, as she acknowledges that her friends see more dancing and she sees more K-pop. Because, of course, the algorithm is designed to personalize content based on individual engagement. And she is more into K-pop than dancing. And this, I thought, was a really interesting observation to me, as it shows how both a sense of personal and cultural identity or community can be shaped by the algorithm, though it is designed to personalize content. So it's very much individualized. So there are kind of these two things that are going on at the same time and being negotiated at the same time. This, we argue, is one dimension of how algorithms can help orient users toward community. But despite that very positive aspect that we saw, a number of young people in our study also demonstrated a critical awareness of how algorithmic cultures may expose users to misinformation or unwanted information, and how they employed practices to resist this or to filter out such content. And I'm going to come to some of those examples soon, but we see that that indicates that they didn't passively trust the algorithm. It wasn't giving them everything that they wanted. Rather, they employed techniques to test the validity of content that surfaced in their feed, and are wanting to explore these practices and tensions in this paper to highlight that by seeking to work with, train, or resist the algorithm, young people in the study showed agency in mutually shaping TikTok communities and also Instagram, and I'm going to look at both in this paper. Training them into a safe space of support, informal learning, culture shaping trends and identity, with some outliers that I'll also explore. Okay. In terms of some ideas that frame some of the examples I'll show you from the study, I think it's important that we first of all put young people's view that they can shape the algorithm, that they can curate their feed, because this is a little bit out of step with some studies which say the opposite. And certainly it's a finding that resists discourses around platform algorithms, which argue that user agency is limited by an algorithmic black box which personalizes content to users, keeping them glued to the platform in order to monetize and sell that attention to advertisers. This is a pretty clear argument from some scholars. You know, particularly scholars like Shoshana Zuboff, quoted on the right here, who claims that by harvesting data from users, platforms are able to build sophisticated psychological profiles, which not only allow personalized content to be targeted to users, but also personalized ads and sponsored content. As mentioned, this may be delivered in the form of sponsored content or influencer marketing to sell a brand or a product on TikTok or Instagram, or it could be subtle political advertising, demonstrating the opportunities for manipulation and persuasion. Zuboff argues that through these techniques, citizens are rendered into remote controlled subjects, shifting agency away from users and toward the platform. But for other scholars, this is a simplistic account that conceals the agency that users have to shape platforms and algorithms through what scholars like Burgess, Albury, McCosker, and Wilkin describe as algorithmic literacies or everyday data cultures. This scholarship argues that users aren't passively controlled by algorithms, but can and do work with and negotiate algorithms in a variety of ways. Some algorithmic literacy practices can, as Burgess and colleagues tell us, be found in the way social media users drive and respond to likes, interact with content, devise a profile, or manage search strategies. And we see these tactics being intentionally deployed often by content creators and influencers, as Crystal's work points to game the algorithm in order to help build audiences and certainly also to monetize their creations. But what about everyday users? There are some scholars who argue that users hailing from marginalized communities feel that they are able to train the algorithm so they can engage in an identity-based community. So TikTok scholars, and I'm referring here to Milton and colleagues, but there are many and I'll refer to others, they claim that marginalized users now view TikTok as a platform whose purpose and unparalleled primary talent is to identify and construct community along identity lines. We see this in academic research on queer TikTok, and I'm thinking of Steph DeGay's work, in terms of mental health communities who form on TikTok, and Milton and Olive is a good example. And of course, as I'm wanting to present today, we also see it in how TikTok is a positive platform for connecting with our diaspora community. And just to correct my original abstract and title, I will be focusing not only on TikTok, but also examples where users interacted with Instagram's algorithm to shape community. Although Instagram's feed is less driven by recommendation than TikTok, which is like the pinnacle, if you like, nonetheless, recommended content does also enter into users' feeds. There's the explore page, and there are some of those aspects of Instagram as well. So I will be looking at some of those examples. Okay, so I'm wanting to go to some examples from the study now. There we go. Okay, so in looking at aspects of curating the algorithm or training the algorithm in order to find community or to have your community represented, particularly on TikTok, I'm wanting to present some of these examples from the study. This is the first quote here is from Charlotte, who grew up in Singapore, moved to Australia with her father during high school. And she claims that your feed is curated by you to a large extent. And this is what you're going to be presented with on TikTok. For her, this was really important. She was someone who was queer and a feminist, and for whom finding community on social media was a bit of a lifeline, particularly given that her father clashed with her, had different political views to her, and certainly they clashed on issues of gender politics in particular. So it was important for her to shape the For You page on TikTok and also on her other social media profiles as well. So she was getting a lot of information about her community. In the second quote, we return to Devi, who really was one of the exemplary, I guess, young people in the study, who largely because she told us at the outset that she lived on TikTok. And she was introduced to TikTok by her cousins in India, who she claims forced her to create content. She's a content creator. And that they also produced dance videos and comedic content themselves, which they shared with herself and her family in Australia. She advised that through this participation, she stayed up to date with popular cultural trends and memes relevant to her community. And she particularly liked sharing memes that communicated humour, that it was culturally specific. And she shared this during the ethnography. She shared this example and put up a caption to explain why she shared it. And as she said, it's a meme that was created by a couple of kids on TikTok, which conveys culture-specific humour based on the experience of translating Punjabi and English words into a joke, or looking at the way those words get mixed up. It's interesting to also note in this example the way that hashtags are used to direct content to particular language groups for whom the humour is designed for. So you can see here hashtag Punjabi, Muslim, Islam, Sikh. So very much speaking to that language group that this meme and piece of humour relates to. Like other platforms where content creators and ordinary users can signify who they are and call communities into being with a well-crafted hashtag, or by co-opting popular hashtags, TikTok and Instagram does allow users to add hashtags to content in a manner which selects audiences and curates conversations, often in the interests of making visible the interests, the culture, the experiences of cultural community, multicultural community, and also marginalised communities, shaping what have sometimes been referred to as counterpublics, although that's more often used to refer to Twitter counterpublics, and Black Twitter in particular. So there were lots of good examples in our study of how users co-curate community on TikTok and on Instagram. And carrying on from this, we found many participants in the study who co-curated their feed through liking and following community pages, content creators, and journalist and news pages that conveyed community-related information. So Alexis, for example, whose parents were born in Chile, connected to her culture by following pages run by Chileans on Instagram, and particularly which were translated into English for diaspora community. And she liked to follow what was happening in politics in particular. So the importance of some content from a diaspora community being translated into English was really important and relevant to her and to many communities in Australia as well. Again, Debbie surfaces again, and I do keep coming back to her because she spoke so much about, Punjabi sort of culture and references that she followed on her social media. So here she speaks about a Punjabi feminist influencer who called out misogyny within her community. And she noted one example where this influencer doxed a troll who left an explicit comment on one of her videos, tracking him down to a school in Melbourne and publicly shaming him in one of her posts. Debbie thought this was amazing. She was inspired by this and delighted when this influencer liked a meme page that she had created, which shared POC-related humour and memes. Another participant on the right here, Yasmina, whose parents were born in Iran. She used Instagram to research her community and follow journalists who posted about Iranian politics. And she liked and shared content claiming that she felt a responsibility to boost this content given her relative safety in living in Australia and the privilege of having a platform to share her political views with when her extended family in Iran didn't share that same privilege. There were some other examples of activism, both, in this instance on Instagram, that was shared by some participants in the study. So this ties in with some of the previous examples, if you like, where participants encountered a lot of content in their feed from activists using hashtags to curate conversations around racism and injustice. And they explained how they'd chosen to react and try and share and boost the content and drive awareness of these issues that impacted on them and their communities. So Noor, who was a recently arrived refugee from Afghanistan, provided captioned screenshots explaining the issues she engaged with on Instagram. She stressed that she used her account to share content created by activists and raise awareness of the impacts of the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan. And the Taliban takeover took place very closely to when we actually were doing our ethnography. So obviously hers and her friends' feeds were filled with this kind of content. She showed us her Explore page, which was filled with this content given she was engaging with it so frequently. And the frequency of it even led her to feel overwhelmed and depressed at times. But like Yasmina, she felt she needed to use her account to support her community and promote visibility around issues that were relevant to her, and trying to also encourage friends, Australian friends in her network to share the content as well. And there's some other examples here. I spoke about the hashtag. There were some examples from hashtag movements such as Stop Asian Hate and Black Lives Matter that was appearing in the young people in our study. It was appearing in their feed constantly in response to institutional racism and race hate stirred by the COVID-19 pandemic. And they also shared this idea that they had a responsibility to click and share to support and promote justice for theirs and other communities affected. But young people's experiences of recommendation algorithms wasn't solely one which sparked community recognition and joy. Participants also expressed a critical understanding of how TikTok and Instagram's algorithmic cultures may expose users to misinformation by lulling them into a feeling of trust in the stream of personalized and relatable content. In response to this, participants employed a number of tactics to resist the algorithm and algorithmic bias. So Amber, for example, spoke about how she began to become more active and critical of how issues are selected and presented to users based on their political leanings and biases. She felt that this made her vulnerable to misinformation, and as a result, she stopped accessing news through social media, and she also took care to carefully research who she followed. So if she was following content creators and influencers, she did her research, if you like. Noor also commented on this, referring to how easy it was to manipulate people who trusted content that appeared to come from community and which was directed at helping community. And she referred to an example of a scam that was disguised as a request to help provide medicine to wounded soldiers in Afghanistan. So this was one example that led her to step back and take a pause from posting and sharing content related to the situation in Afghanistan, as she had been doing, because she felt that sense of responsibility. So there was a little bit of resistance there as well to how the algorithm was working, how people were manipulating it and spreading misinformation. And finally, Ying Ying is a bit more ambivalent. So the third quote in the corner there demonstrated a bit more ambivalence regarding how she responds to algorithmic recommendations. Following Crystal's presentation this morning, she makes reference to how politically related content came into her For You page during the 2022 election, which she claims is probably because she resides in Australia, so the geolocation aspect. So she does demonstrate algorithmic awareness, but she also acknowledges that she would only like political content if the algorithm recommended it to her. So she was unlikely to engage with political content unless it appeared in her feed. Yeah, and in this sense, she did say that that when that content was coming through, that she did like some content, but she qualified that she wouldn't comment, showing some hesitation or reluctance to fully engage with this content that she definitely wouldn't engage with or comment on in her navigation of other social media platforms. Okay, so again, this is just some work that I brought together in the last week, really. But in terms of what we might summarize from some of these findings, I think certainly in our study at least, there were some digitally literate young people who not only had awareness of how algorithms tailor content to them, but they actively liked, shared and followed content creators to co-curate their feeds. So it felt like it reflected their identity and their community. While the algorithm also helped them to engage in informal learning regarding culture and politics, and to support or boost activist and hashtag movements designed to raise awareness of systemic injustice like racism and other things that impacted their community, such as wars. But digitally literate users also had awareness of how algorithms that personalised content may also lull users into a sense that the content can be trusted, particularly if it appears that it's designed to support community. To challenge this, some users became active in finding out who they should and shouldn't follow on social media. Some stepped back and paused their engagement or avoided engaging with and sharing news they encountered through these platforms. But for other participants, though they did have awareness of how algorithms shape their feed, they didn't necessarily change their practices too much, and even demonstrated at times that it is possible they could be manipulated into engaging with political content on their feed, which shows a little bit more of an ambivalent side to algorithmic cultures. So if you like, there's a scale of digital literacy and understanding, but also I think for many young people, a tendency to ignore and to enjoy themselves and to not necessarily suspend, their usual practices, even if they're aware that they may be manipulated somewhat. So that's all I've got for today. Thank you.
We have about a half an hour, I think, for questions. Shall I pull up? Sorry, I'll just see if I can pull up the Slido.
Sure.
Are there any questions in the room?
Is that on? Bronwyn, is that on?
I pushed it to on. Can you not hear me?
Yeah, I do.
Any questions in the room? Yes, and then
I always ask. Oh, thanks.
Thank you, Amelia. Always wonderful to hear your pieces. My question is relating to, so we've got this algorithmic awareness of the curation and how these things can be curated by the users to some extent. Do they exhibit an awareness of, for instance, what happened with YouTube when they decided to start monetizing and demonetizing certain things? They just changed their algorithms, changed the visibility, changed who got rewarded. So obviously the platform sovereignty takes precedence over anything the users might do. Did they, or did it even come up, did they have an awareness that they don't have a control over when the black box can change and stop yielding the results that they want?
Yeah, no, I mean, they were 13 to 18-year-olds mainly. So I think demonstrating the fact that, if they're liking lots of content, it's going to flood their feed. These kind of things were something they were aware of. There also were, when I say there were content creators amongst the group, there were, but they weren't monetizing their content. They were sharing it with community and with family and with friends, and, you know, they were excited if someone they didn't know liked it, or, you know, left a comment or something like that. So no, I don't think they had that level of sophistication necessarily. Yeah, it was more their own everyday experiences of the algorithm and how it shaped this sense of, you know, a presentation of community and identity and these kind of things that they noticed. Like, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say some of those higher level platform changes were noticeable.
And then we had a question here. Yes.
Thanks, Amelia. That was wonderful as all your talks. 2 questions, if you don't mind.
Yep.
I was really happy to see that a lot of the female interviewees seemed really excited that there was someone to look up to. It seems like there's advertisement on the app. Is this something that they're fostering outside of the app? Did they refer to friends and classmates who also had that experience, so they needed to hack their algorithm to get that experience that they saw? And the second question is, given that you've researched both TikTok and Instagram, maybe not in the slides, but in the larger study, did any of them reflect on the differences between the two? Why do they still use both?
I think, well, second question first. Most of the young people in the study use TikTok and Instagram. Instagram more so. There were many more users of Instagram and WhatsApp, but of course, WhatsApp, no algorithms. So, I think, what was the first question again? So, their friendship groups. It was interesting, I think, to see, because I mean, they're young, and so they're not necessarily involved in activist groups. So I think for some of the young people were suggesting that they were learning about culture and community through their social media connections, sometimes more so than in the schools that they were in, sometimes even within their friendship groups, where they felt maybe a little bit alienated or isolated, and, you know, had more of a sense of community on their social media. But some friendship groups really fostered this sense of, you know, particularly the ones that like creating content. They liked engaging with content on TikTok or Instagram and talking about it amongst themselves. So yeah, that, for example, with Devi, I mean, she shared with her friends, like, and commented on, look, your For You page is different to mine, and like, and why, and trying to work some of those things out. A lot of these the people in the study were involved in some organizations at the school level. So not so much community groups and organizations, but within the school, there might be, like, you know, a feminist group or something within the school that they belong to, or there might be like the queer group that they belong to, and, you know, there might be some official representation in the school. So I mean, they are kind of engaging with activism, you know, in their school life, and then the rest is through social media. And of course, we collected this data 2020 to 2022. So this was during lockdowns, this was during COVID, when there was little ability actually to engage more broadly with activism or community groups. So social media then became really, really important, school and social media. And in fact, a lot of those groups they used to organize through at school then moved on to WhatsApp or something on, you know, so they kind of were always sort of, I think, having that social media presence to a lot of the activists and organizing kind of stuff.
There's a question here and then here.
Love you, Sanskrit.
I think my question is, and it's about whether the perception of having an agency over the algorithm is being used by the platform itself. And because the ease that I see on Instagram to manifest copy videos and Bollywood songs is so much easier than YouTube. So does that change users' loyalty towards using platforms?
Thanks, Sanskrit. Very searching, interesting question as always. I think, well, if you look at the kind of if you look at how these platforms represent themselves, like TikTok, for example, says very clearly in, what the platform is about, the more you engage, the more you're going to get your who you are, your community, etc., fed back to you. And so they're very aware of things like training the algorithm and all these kind of folkloric elements, I guess, of how you could curate your feed. And they try to maximize that in how, they present themselves. Instagram less so, I think. And I'm not, so with your question, you're asking whether the young people themselves were aware of how platform, like the algorithm specifically of different platforms, or? The platforming. If they're using these.
Other users being deliberately feel like they practice all of these algorithms, find the platforms.
Yeah, I mean, that's how the platforms like to represent themselves, that they're always talking to communities, they're always learning from them, and they're always tweaking the design in order to give people more of what they want. But of course, we know with a lot of these algorithms, there's a business model, there are commercial interests that really does sometimes drive these things. And so there can be the PR kind of presentation of, yeah, we're giving you what you want. Of course, platforms also listen to users. I mean, their whole strategy is to engage users and to keep them engaged. So yeah, they're doing that work to learn who their users are and what they want. But I think that them telling the users this is much more a kind of way of saying, we're interested in giving you the experience you want, rather than we are interested in monetizing your attention, your creations, or the data that you provide to us. And yeah, they obviously wouldn't say that on the platform, but yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. To what extent were your participants aware of discourses of parents, school governments, something? How are the concerns of those institutions actually brought out in the experiences?
Yeah. Well, in terms of, there wasn't a social media ban for young users then, or being discussed. I think maybe the conversation would be a little bit different now, but it was during COVID that most of these interviews and ethnography took place. So I think young people were particularly interested in organizing their day in such a way that they could go through their feeds and engage, and before they had to interact with family. They were spending so much time with family. It was how to get private space to be on social media and to do those kind of things. So they were definitely negotiating that with some of the young people we spoke to who came from refugee backgrounds. Like, there was some of those questions around access were also an issue. Like, if there's a family that has, one laptop or something, then that made how you segmented your day, how you did your study, how you, accessed social media a little bit different. But all the young people we spoke to had mobile phones and, engaged in some way. But I think the concern at the time was, we are locked down with our parents. How do we do the things we actually want to do and share the things we want to share? So yeah, it was a lot of alone time, which wasn't alone time, it was social time that they were trying to find.
I think Ruben had a question.
Yeah, I had a question. Thank you so much for your talk. I'm thinking through the questions, because what you were presenting really spoke to me in terms of the research I'm doing, but maybe from the opposite end, because I'm looking at political identities on extreme ends of the ideological spectrum and how rigid they are on paper, or how they present themselves as rigid, but then that rigidity sort of cracks at points, and then that's what I'm finding out, because I'm doing the research right now, so I don't really have a position in it. But I was wondering if when you were looking at identity awareness, that the performance of that identity when it was performed to others in the online spaces, if you saw moments of rigidity, moments of like an identity that had to be defended, that couldn't be cracked, or on the other hand, it was always fluid. I mean, I was wondering what kind of like back and forths in terms of fluidity and strict kind of uncrackable identities. Have you experienced that? I don't know, from your perspective around those issues, I guess.
No, not in this research study, and not with young people who are much more likely to be nervous and feel like they lack knowledge to have a political opinion and point of view, which is why there's often a unwilling, among the young people in this study, there was an unwillingness really to post publicly, even to comment publicly, sometimes even to like, because they understood how metrics and the algorithm and what have you worked, and they felt a reluctance to have to always express like themselves, this kind of participatory culture thing. There was a bit of a resistance to it, which was interesting. And I think there was a critical awareness that was coming through with, for example, a sense in which a lot of people are very performative in liking and sharing political content, and it lacks substance and they lack knowledge, and maybe it's better if they actually did the research before they jumped on a bandwagon or shared or what have you. So there were more of those views coming through actually than people who are very rusted on it. It's unusual for that age group though to have really strong, clear political views. There's much more, I'm scared to post this because I might be wrong, or people might say that I'm wrong, or I might offend people, I might offend my family with the views that I have. So there's much more of that kind of.
Pretty much the opposite then, kind of governments are kind of preaching, especially now, that these young people actually have really skeptical and aware of how social media works, and not so much being, yes, or celebrate or preach upon. They understand that. And
yeah, I mean, with this question around agency, obviously it's a bit of a sliding scale, and I wanted to kind of show that there were people that had algorithmic awareness, but it didn't always flow through to their practices or their activities, like, but sometimes it did. And there were people that were more digitally literate than others as well. But there was, even for people who were less digitally literate, they obviously are discussing things in class with their peers and feeling a certain hesitancy to stake a claim or something like that, particularly publicly, particularly on social media. Yeah.
And there was
I was really interested in the accounts of, the challenging certain cultural narratives via, the content they follow on TikTok. So I know this is not a quantitative study, but I'm interested in whether there were any kind of anecdotally, any kind of causal links between people who were more resistant or trying to be more proactive about the content they follow and curate. Beyond ideas of digital and media literacy, were there people who were more resistant than others? And is it because of, do you think it's because of, someone, their cultural identity, or whether there's a range of reasons, or whether it was expressed differently on different platforms, if they were on both Insta and TikTok?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can go to that depth, I guess, unless I particularly look at that. But well, there was, for example, Charlotte, who she was queer. She had tensions with her family. They didn't like who she was or the views that she espoused, the feminist views. Her dad was politically conservative. And so there was stress and tension at home. And again, this was during COVID. So yeah, obviously it's really important to find community online there. She was still very critical and aware, but it was more, social media was more important as a space of social connection, almost like a lifesaver, really, for her, like at a time that was very alienating and isolating. So, and I think, yeah, they all had very different profiles. Like, I mean, they all came from, although I would say most of them, certainly, because we recruited through multicultural youth agencies. We were recruited through one school, which was in Sydney and in a very culturally diverse and working class area. And we were recruited through a market research company as well. So, I mean, we had the sampling was, you know, diverse, I guess. So we did have quite a diverse range of young people with different experiences. To go to social media and find community and identity. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess if you belong to a marginalized group or community, then yes, social media becomes a bit more of a life raft potentially. But then I think about, you know, the Afghani young girls that we were speaking to who were very family focused, like, and spoke to their family about political issues, but also just also half lived on social media and very engaged in this content and wanting to share this content. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's just those kind of really marginalized young people who are trying to find community online. I think it's just young people's everyday milieu and culture that they're always on social media, engaging with it, disengaging with it at different times for different reasons. Yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Okay, thanks, Amelia. That's quite interesting research. So I recently came across a piece of news which surveyed the Australians regarding their attitude towards their level of trust to be specific towards different brands. And I wonder, you know, the result was actually number 3 was Facebook, so the most untrusted, and then TikTok was kind of number 9. I wonder what that result would be like if it were, you know, surveyed against those the younger generations as in your study. So since you've looked at these 2 platforms, I wonder to what extent do you think the regulatory discourses and also the geopolitical tensions shape their perceptions towards their own experience on the platform? Because I think that perhaps their own experience might be a more prominent factor that shapes their perception, but I'm not quite sure whether, you know, to what extent the other, you know, these things actually exist outside their you know, how these factors shape their perceptions. And also the second question is in relation to the intergroup sort of dynamics because of the, you know, the fascinating results coming from those diversified members and groups. Do you see there is this, I wouldn't say solidarity, but it would be, do you see there is this sort of concerted sort of effort or, you know, something moving towards solidarity among these different members in these diverse communities?
Okay, thank you for your questions. So the first question, I think, reminded me of an earlier question about their awareness of regulation, of regulatory environments. I think, for example, the Afghani girls that we spoke to were sharing a lot of content about the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan. Some of that content was really graphic, and some of the content they shared was taken down by the platform. And there was one instance actually, so with the ethnography, we used this mobile ethnography platform called Indemo, and it meant you could send prompts to users and they would upload information with little diary entries and things like that. And so one of the young girls from Afghanistan uploaded some screenshots of content that had been blocked by Instagram and commented on how, you know, she felt like her community was being censored in relation to the content that they were sharing. I guess it would be similar, you know, with today with, you know, Arab youth, Palestinian youth who are sharing content and it's getting blocked, or they're looking at people they follow who are sharing content that's being blocked, or they say they're being shadow banned or what have you. So there were some responses to that level of regulation and a sense in which censorship of some communities' views and their political views was taking place. But otherwise, I'm not sure that there was a lot of awareness. And I didn't capture your second question. Would you mind repeating the second question?
Sorry, if I could. So the second question is in relation to the intergroup dynamics. So among the those younger people you surveyed, to what extent do you think there is a possible sort of, do you think, you know, so for example, they're all residing in Australia, right? So to what extent their experience on these platforms, they think are somehow contributing to their the everyday experiences otherwise, so not sort of on platform but also off platform?
I mean, the intergroup dynamics came through with some young people we spoke to more so than others. You know, that there were stories with young people finding community on Reddit or you know, Discord servers or whatever it might be, who didn't have that many friends offline. And so there were people that we spoke to for whom the online world was their world, essentially, and all of their connections were formed there, and that was very important to them. And then there were others who were really, really social, like Debbie, for example, who her friendship group, I mean, yeah, they would get together, they would do TikToks, like, you know, dance, Bollywood TikToks and things like that. She said that she wasn't as interested in dance, but she did do them with her friends, and they kind of shared them amongst themselves. They didn't share it publicly, but it was still that interaction with, you know, some of those, I guess, meme formats that Crystal's speaking about, and using that and as a social bonding kind of experience. And then, you know, some of the young people would then share it maybe with something that they had filmed here with their friends. They might share it to family overseas via WhatsApp or something like that. So there's also that kind of, you know, cross-platform diffusion of some of these forms of content that are being created as well. Yeah, but sometimes that content creation process was friendship groups and it was part of their dynamic kind of thing. And for others, yeah, that social media was something completely different.
I might permit myself one last question. I was just wondering if because there seemed to be both interaction, I guess, within the diaspora, but also, I guess, back to the country of perhaps origin.
Yeah.
I was wondering if they made a distinction both between those two forms and also in terms of language, if whether it was in English or not in English.
Yes. So yeah, I think the transnational connections, there's a paper that I'm going to be writing soon on this because it's so interesting. And particularly looking at formats like memes that translate across, that are used to translate across context. So there was one young girl in the study whose family, I think aunties and what have you, lived in China. And cousins as well. And she was like, okay, I had to very quickly learn how to use QQ. And I also had to learn the meme formats in order to communicate with family overseas and to have these kind of conversations, which is sort of translating, I guess, across culture. It's like that kind of brokering thing I think that happens, particularly with young people who are sometimes doing that work to keep those transnational connections and grease the wheels in various ways to do that work. And even Devi as well was sharing some memes that she knew would be funny or that would kind of speak to her family in India. And likewise, they did the same. And there was kind of, you know, there was a bit of learning that went on of what was funny in different places and, you know, how that kind of bonded the family or together, I think. Yeah, there were some of those examples.
Thank you. We'd have time for one last question if anyone, otherwise, thank you very much. Thanks for a very interesting talk.
Thank you.